Homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. This is a question and answer session specifically on the KARANIYAMETTA Sutta, on the practice of cultivating loving kindness or metta. The question that's been asked is it important to memorize the KARANIYAMETTA Sutta? There's probably a few aspects to answering this question. The first aspect that I probably want to go through is the importance of memorization in the Buddha's teachings. When you read the Pali Canon, the Sutta Pitaka, what you find is that the Buddha has emphasized memorization throughout his teachings, and particularly for monastics, for the continuation of the Dhamma and not the decline of the Dhamma, that recitation is actually very important. And also to actually be able to share Dhamma precisely as the Buddha has said it is also very key. And so when you are actually sharing Dhamma, being able to actually quote the Buddha directly is actually very important, because it's in those words that the insight pathway, the precision of the meaning and the understanding of the Dhamma comes through. Secondly, one of the other aspects is with the meditation, you actually need to know the steps. So if you memorize the KARANIYAMETTA Sutta, which in some parts of the world it has been memorized as one of the core things that is chanted or recited, then it's much easier to actually draw out the steps of the meditation. And we'll have a look at that a little bit closer. And then the other part of it is really about what Buddha calls, when you chant it or recite it, it's a way of protection. So if you actually have memorized the KARANIYAMETTA Sutta, then that can flow forth. If you haven't memorized it, then there's something that maybe is lacking, and it's important to actually include that as part of one's practice, that in particular situations, having a chant such as the KARANIYAMETTA chant or the Mahamangala chant or various other chants is actually quite useful and quite important. So we have the Sugatavinaya Sutta, and there's 4 things that the Buddha has emphasized that lead to the decline and disappearance of true Dhamma. And the first one is around memorization of the discourses, that if they're learned incorrectly, memorized incorrectly with misplaced words and phrases, then the meaning gets misinterpreted or distorted. The second one is around suvacha, duvacha, around if mendicants are difficult to admonish, duvacha, having qualities that make them difficult to admonish, they're impatient and don't take instruction respectfully. The fourth is that where mendicants are very learned, so bahussuto, they have memorized all the scriptures and are quite knowledgeable, even about the Vinaya and other aspects of the teaching, but then they don't make others recite the discourses. And so when they pass away, it's cut off at the root, because there's no one there to preserve the actual teachings and the Vinaya. And the last one is around senior mendicants being indulgent and slack, and leaders in backsliding, neglecting seclusion, not rousing energy, and so on and so forth. But the 2 that are quite key here are around memorizing correctly the words of the Buddha and the noble arahants. And the second one is really making others or encouraging others to carefully do the same. And where lay people come in is to help with that. So yes, the Sangha, in terms of the monastic Sangha, do carry a lot of the weight of carrying forward the teachings of the Buddha. But when you contemplate the fourfold Sangha, which includes lay men, lay women who are practicing the Noble Eightfold Path towards Nibbana, then you actually understand that there's also a role to play for lay people, because it serves as an encouragement to others if we all know the Buddha's teachings really well, and that we become these examples that are interested and have an intention towards the continuation rather than the decline, and for the preservation rather than the disappearance of Sadhamma, true Dhamma. And in this way, if we develop these good qualities and noble aspects of the practice, which is what the Buddha has emphasized and encouraged, then we are playing our part in that. And it's for the benefit of all sentient beings, not just for ourselves that we make such an effort. And if we want to share Dhamma, then this is also true. If we actually learn correctly, memorize correctly the Buddha's words, and we're able to actually say them out to others without misplacing the words, without mixing up the phrasing, then the meaning has a chance to be interpreted correctly and not to be distorted, not to be subverted, and not to be misinterpreted. So that's one aspect, that in answering the question about whether one should memorize the Karaniyametta, of course it's of benefit to memorize the Karaniyametta, not just for ourselves, but also for other people. And then when it comes to our own practice, then if you refer to the Sekha pāṭipada Sutta, which is about the trainee's mode of progress, so a path of practice if one wants to develop on the Noble Eightfold Path, in this sutta the Buddha has emphasized a number of qualities as foundational qualities towards developing on the path. And one of the key aspects, one of the good qualities that the Buddha refers to is in a grouping of seven good qualities. And one of them is called bahussuta, which is really about having heard much or learned much. And what the Buddha says from this sutta is, one has heard much or is very learned, has remembered what one has heard, has stored what one has heard. Whatever teachings are admirable in the beginning, admirable in the middle, admirable in the end, that, in their meaning and expression, proclaim the holy life that is entirely complete and pure, those one has listened to often, retained, discussed, accumulated, examined with one's mind, and well penetrated in terms of one's views. Now, the Sekha pāṭipada Sutta is a teaching that Venerable Ananda was giving, as requested by the Buddha, to lay people. And in this teaching, everything is around the encouragement for lay people to practice. And so, as you can see, the encouragement when it comes to bahussuta, having being heard much or is very learned, to develop this quality, one has to know a lot or has heard a lot. So that means one examines the suttas, but then you store what you've heard. So that's something that's important. So in our modern day, when we study it, we write notes, we store talks, we have ways and means of storing. But it also has this aspect of memorization. So in the last part of what was read out, the Buddha has this learning system. So you are able to listen to the Dhamma often, you retain it, you can discuss or verbalize it, you accumulate, you examine with your mind, and you penetrate well. Now within that, when you retain it and when you discuss, accumulate, the discussion part is actually can be translated also as part of recitation, being able to memorize and recite out loud. So there's definitely this aspect of, if you want to develop on the path, this aspect has to be actually developed in this manner as part of the Buddha's learning system. And so when the question is asked whether one should memorize the Karaniyametta Sutta, certainly it's something that is encouraged by the Buddha if you want to develop the Noble Eightfold Path and these Sekha or trainee qualities. If one wants to be a little more precise, there's a sutta called the Ummagga Sutta, which is in the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 4, discourse 186. And in this sutta, the question is asked, in what way is one a learned memorizer of the Dhamma defined, which is in Pali bahussuto, dhammadharo, hotī. And the answer that's given is given in relation to the ninefold division of the Buddha's teaching, so the discourses, the mixed prose, the explanations, the poetic verses, the inspired utterances, the quotes of the Buddha, the birth stories and the amazing stories, and even the analysis or the Q&As that is given. So that's the ninefold aspects of the teachings. In respect of these many teachings of the Buddha, it said, but if anyone understands the meaning and Dhamma of even a 4-line verse, and if they can practice in accordance with the Dhamma, that is enough to be called a learned memorizer of the Dhamma. So Buddha is emphasizing here that even a 4-line verse, so a gatha that is comprised of 4 lines, if you've memorized them and you understand the meaning and the Dhamma of that verse, and you practice and manifest in accordance with that verse, then you're considered a learned memorizer of the Dhamma. So memorization doesn't just have memorization as its core. It's also the Buddha's attributed knowing the meaning, realizing the meaning of the Dhamma, and also then being able to practice it accordingly. And so when it comes to the Karaniyametta, the question actually opens up that what you've asked is, okay, do I need to memorize the Karaniyametta? Well, memorization is one aspect. If you take this Ummagga Sutta, it's more than just the memorization, it's also the practice, understanding the meaning and then being able to practice it. And so the Karaniyametta is more than a 4-line verse. It's actually comprised of 10 verses. And we've been through it in the sessions, and you can see we can actually understand the meaning of the Buddha's teaching on the cultivation of loving kindness. And therefore, when you memorize it, it means that you can also practice it. So through the sessions that we've been through, we've actually developed the aspect that fulfills the Ummagga Sutta. So the memorization of being able to know the steps in the inside pathway and practice it becomes the part that is the aspect that needs to be fulfilled towards that. So if we go back to the Karaṇīyametta Sutta itself, what you can see is, at a basic level, if one can't actually memorize the whole sutta straight away, it's good to memorize at least the key steps of the meditation, because in that way it still fulfills the memorization, as the Buddha has emphasized in the Ummagga Sutta, that if you've been through this sutta well and you're beginning to understand the meaning of what the Buddha says about cultivating loving kindness, that's the first step. The second step is being able to know the steps of the meditation in order to practice it. So say, for example, if you know the 15 steps of the meditation that activate the knowledge pathway, that is good enough if you write that out and you memorize it. So you start with upright, then thoroughly upright, then easy to instruct, gentle, not arrogant, controlled in the sense faculties, prudent, courteous, not yearning to associate with families or groups, and then being able to wish all beings from safety and gladness, that may all beings be happy. And within that, you know that you cultivate loving kindness to all living beings. So all the instructions where the Buddha says all different sizes, shapes, those that are living near and far, those that are in existence and those that are still seeking existence, is contained within that Sugatavinaya, that wishing all beings to be happy. And then the steps perceiving anger and ill will, that you know that you abandon all those because you don't wish anyone to suffer. And then you also memorize the virtuousness, and then removing greed for sensual pleasures, and then the final step of not coming back again to a mother's womb. So if you memorize the 15 steps, at least you know how to activate the knowledge pathway or insight pathway for this particular sutta. But essentially, over time, if you can actually know this meditation, then it's more complete, as in know the actual sutta itself, the 10 verses, or the equivalent in English. Then you know, as you run through the verses in your mind, that you know how to do the meditation, but complete it very well, that the meaning won't be lost, and you manifest according to this particular sutta. And what you really activate in this sutta really runs true when it comes to this quality of higher learning, bahussuto, in that in the Nagaropama Sutta, which is also in the Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 7, discourse 67, where the Buddha talks about the simile of a fortress or a citadel as a way of emphasizing the 7 good qualities of someone who is learned, and also emphasizes the mental absorptions, the jhanas, the development of those. That when it comes to being learned, the Buddha says this is like the weapons in the fortress or the citadel for the disciple of the noble ones. And when you actually develop this quality of very learned, and as weapons, what the Buddha says is you abandon what is unskillful, you develop what is skillful, and you abandon what is blameworthy, you develop what is blameless, and you look after oneself with purity. So this applies to all the qualities, the 7 qualities that the Buddha is encouraging to develop. And what you see with the Karaṇīyametta Sutta rings true to this, because the Karaṇīyametta Sutta definitely encourages kusala over akusala, because you're developing the Noble Eightfold Path and you're developing the dasa kusala, so the 10 skilled states. And so when you do that, you're abandoning what is blameworthy. There are no blemishes when you are cultivating in accordance with the Karaṇīyametta Sutta, because you're cleaning, you're purifying. And so you won't be blameworthy, you will actually be blameless when you develop the skilled states, because your physical conduct is upright, your verbal conduct is upright, and your mental conduct is upright, if not thoroughly upright. And as you remember from the Karaṇīyametta Sutta, the Buddha is emphasizing as a mother to her only child. So the perfect mother to her only child, the ideal that the Buddha is referring to is one who has perfected the physical, the verbal, and the mental conduct. And it's blemish-free from that aspect. And the final part of this is looking after oneself with purity. That throughout the Karaṇīyametta Sutta, what is true about it is that you're seeking to maintain that virtuousness, that silava, that if you've developed up to that point in the meditation, you're always seeking to preserve that purity, to maintain it in order to then cultivate Karaṇīyametta. So someone on the Sekha path, someone who's a trainee, when you develop bahussuta, this learned quality, then it becomes a weapon from the aspect of not the mundane sense of what weapons are, but as something that fortifies you, that you know that when you are being challenged on this path, then you pull out something like the Karaṇīyametta Sutta, that one's purity rings true, and that is the purity that overcomes all hindrances, all defilements, all challenges that come towards taking you off the path and perverting one's view. That something like the Karaṇīyametta Sutta becomes a weapon because it's so powerful, not just in its protection mechanism, but for all the blessings of loving kindness, of metta. And so when you see this aspect, then it fulfills and completes one's training. If you can actually memorize, understand its meaning, and then practice it. And so this is one way of answering the question of whether it's beneficial even to memorize the Karaṇīyametta Sutta. And of course the answer is utmost yes, and for all these reasons that we've just gone through. So I offer this as the answer to the question. Blessings of the Triple Gem. May all of you be happy and well and protected on the path. Teruan Saranai.